Hey artists! Welcome to another tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how I went about painting this cute little barn owl portrait. It's got a nice sort of blurred forested background and it's sitting on a nice textured sort of dead wooden branch. These are one of my favorite animals of all time, so anytime I get to paint a barn owl, it's a good day. Now, if you're craving more help and want the full real-time tutorial complete with my voice walking you through every single moment, paint mixing recipes, reference photos, and more, I think you will love the Wildlife Painting Academy. New tutorials are added each month, and it truly is your secret weapon for learning how to paint realistic wildlife easily. You can check it out in the description of this video. This Barn Owl Masterclass was the new tutorial added for the month of July. You can get instant access to the full masterclass for this tutorial instantly when you join the Wildlife Painting Academy. Alrighty, let's jump in. So I'm starting all my paintings by giving it a nice wash of acrylic paint. I always go with a nice warm brown. It just gives me something, a little less obnoxious than pure white to work with. And then I always jump in by mapping out the darkest parts of my painting first. At this point when I'm mapping things out, I tend to use as large a brush possible, and I'm not really going for any detail at this phase. I'm just trying to block in where those major shapes are going to go. So now for the background, starting off with some dark paint, I'm going to start to block in the major shapes of the background. Now I'm going for a blurred background, so there's not going to be, any super identifiable features, which is why I'm just basically going with blobs. Like usual, I always start and then move lighter, so you can see that happening with the background here. Now I'm starting to add in a bit more of a vibrant green. Now, since I wanted a nice soft blurred background, now is when I'm going in with a dry brush and I'm going to blend out my background so it's nice and smooth and blurred. I'm starting to work on this branch that our owl is sitting on here. Again, starting with my darks and kind of building up from there. I don't want this branch to be too crazy detailed because I don't want it to distract from the owl. I want the owl to be the first thing that you look at. And then you kind of travel around the painting from there. So I'm keeping my brush strokes pretty big here, using the largest brush that I can, and just giving little hints of detail. All right, now it's time to start on our little cute feathered friend here. I'm going to start off by blocking in the different patterns on our bird. So on the wings in the back, we've got this really beautiful mottled pattern of dark grayish brown and that beautiful signature rusty color that we're going to see. So I'm starting off by, blocking in where that dark, sort of grayish brown is gonna go. And then we're gonna work around those shapes, adding our rust color after. So for my underpainting here, I'm basically working wet into wet. So that's why I am being a little more strategic about placing my colors, because I know that my oil paint here is wet, so it's gonna be a little harder to layer it on top. So I am being a little strategic about where I'm placing these tones. And now it's time for those rusty colors. See, this is where it kind of almost feels like a paint by number, if you will, in my head, except it's a paint by number that you're making up as you go. But I'm learning where to put those very specific colors for my underpainting, and it just makes the entire task so much easier in the end. So now I'm just kind of moving around my painting, working on my underpainting here. So you can see I'm now working on the head. There's a little bit more of a pale golden tone there. So I shifted my colors a little bit from the palette I was using before, which had a lot of burnt sienna in it to get that really beautiful rust color. And now we're going with a little bit more of a pale gold. I always like to work with the largest brush possible when it comes to working on my underpainting. Not only does it allow you to move a lot faster, but it prevents you from actually jumping into your details too soon. Because when you jump into your details too soon, you're going to end up overwhelming yourself, and it's more or less going to prevent you from building a solid foundation for your painting. And we don't want that. We want this to be, a really easy, beautiful process. So that means taking care of our foundation. And that's why I love using these big brushes, because you can't really jump into detail right away. So for the face here, I'm starting off with a darker brown to kind of map out where the structure is going to go. So barn owls have that signature sort of feather ridge coming up in the very center of their face. And they have, two darker lines that are going to be basically going from the inner corners of their eyes to the beak. And this is basically where the feathers are separating. So you're going to see some shadow there. You're also going to see a little bit of their skin tone. It tends to be a brown color with a little hint of rust to it. So that's why I'm going and blocking out where those dark parts are going to go first. And then I'm going to go add those lighter feathers. So now it's time for those lighter feathers on the face. Again, working with a really big brush here. I'm not paying attention to tight little details yet. So that's why you can see I'm kind of working with larger shapes first before I start to actually build up that feather texture. Those eyes were looking a little sad, so I just took some time and painted in those beautiful little eyes. So I finished my underpainting and I let it dry for a few days since I'm using oils. Now I'm gonna go in and start to put some detail in now that my painting is dry. So I'm starting off by just stippling a large brush on the back and the wings here to kind of build up more of that mottled texture. I started off with the darker paint first to build up that texture, and now I'm going in with a lighter paint. Again, using those same sort of stippling motions with my big brush. So I did the same sort of stippling pattern over those rusty colored patches instead. Some of my brush strokes here were a little aggressive for my taste, so I'm just taking a big fluffy dry brush here and just doing a little light blending. I'm still using that stippling motion here so that I'm not really blending away that texture that I just built. It just helps to take the edge off some of those crazy brush strokes. Barn owls have these adorable little spots on their backs. So here I'm starting to put in the darker portion of those spots, and then I'm going to go in with a detail brush and pop in the little white flecks that you see. So I lost a little bit of definition in the feathers as I was working on my underpainting and adding some detail. So now what I'm doing is I'm going in with a smaller filbert brush here, and I'm using the knife edge of it in order to carve out those feathers again. So the feathers around the head were looking a little boring, so I'm using the same sort of stippling pattern and I'm adding a little bit more texture into those feathers. I've been saving the best for last when it comes for detailing. I left this face to the end because it was going to be one of my favorite parts, and yeah, I like to torture myself apparently. So now I'm going in with a smaller filbert brush here, and again using the knife edge of it so you get a nice sharp line, I am detailing this beautiful little face. So I'm just adding a little bit more detail to this branch here. I'm not going overboard whatsoever because I want the owl to be, center of frame. I want it to be the first thing you look at. And then after, the eye travels to the rest of the painting. But I'm just putting in a couple little hints of some detail into that branch. So now it's time for one of my favorite parts of any oil painting, really. I let it dry for a few days so it was completely dry, and now I'm doing some glazing. First, I'm going in with a sort of shadow glaze that I mixed up, and I'm just reinforcing my shadows. I'm adding some extra cast shadows, reinforcing some that are already there, having some fun with it. And now I'm going in and adding a beautiful rusty colored glaze on top of those orangey patches on our feathers here. I'm using a burnt sienna here as my glaze because it is just the most beautiful color. It's beautifully transparent, so radiant. I love using it, and it worked so well for glazing this little barn owl here. And lastly, I added a little bit of a radiant sort of emerald toned glaze to our background to really amp up that, vibrancy and really make that background pop. That green complements the rusty colored tones so nicely, so they both shine at the same time, yet they're kind of opposite of each other. So I love how vibrant that background looks with those orange feathers. And we're done! Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial on how I painted this adorable little barn owl portrait. If you're interested in the full real-time tutorial with my voice walking you through every moment, complete with a camera on my palette so you can see exactly what I'm mixing up, then I would highly recommend checking out the Wildlife Painting Academy. There's a link in the description of this video. This tutorial was the new one for July, and every month there are 2 new masterclasses added to the Wildlife Painting Academy. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.